Welcome, curious minds. We're diving deep into one of humanity's oldest and most fascinating questions. A question that has puzzled philosophers for over 2,000 years, sparked heated debates in ancient Greece, and continues to challenge our understanding of causality, evolution, and the very nature of existence itself. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Now, before you roll your eyes and think this is just some silly riddle your grandfather used to ask at family dinners, stick with me, because what we're about to explore together goes far beyond a simple question about poultry. This paradox touches on fundamental concepts in philosophy, biology, physics, and even theology. It's a window into how we think about cause and effect, the nature of time itself, and what it means for something to have a beginning. By the end of this video, you'll not only have multiple fascinating answers to this ancient question, but you'll also understand why this paradox has captivated human minds for millennia and continues to be relevant in our modern scientific age. Let's start our journey by traveling back in time. Way back to ancient civilizations, where this question first began to perplex human minds. The chicken or egg paradox isn't some modern internet meme or casual philosophical discussion. It's actually one of the oldest recorded philosophical problems in human history. The earliest known reference to this paradox appears in the works of Aristotle, the great Greek philosopher who lived from 384 to 322 BCE in his work Physics. Aristotle used this question as an example of the problem of determining cause and effect when both elements appear to be necessary for the other's existence. He wrote about the infinite regress problem, where you keep asking, but what caused that? And never reach a satisfactory first cause. But here's something interesting that many people don't know. The question wasn't originally about chickens and eggs as we understand them today. Ancient philosophers were actually discussing birds and eggs in general. The chicken, as we know it today, was still being domesticated and wasn't the universally recognized bird it would later become. Aristotle himself believed that both chickens and eggs had always existed co-eternally. This might sound strange to our modern ears, but remember, this was long before we understood evolution, genetics, or the age of the earth. To Aristotle, the world was eternal and unchanging in its fundamental forms. Chickens had always been chickens, eggs had always been eggs, and the cycle between them was simply the natural order of things. The Roman writer Plutarch, who lived from 46 to 120 CE, also grappled with this question in his work Table Talk. He presented it as a serious philosophical problem, not a joke or riddle. Plutarch was particularly interested in the question because it highlighted the difficulty of establishing causation in cyclical processes. What's fascinating is that different ancient cultures approached this question from completely different angles. While Greek and Roman philosophers saw it as a logical puzzle about causation, other cultures viewed it through religious or mythological lenses. In ancient Egyptian mythology, the cosmic egg was a symbol of creation itself. The god Ptah was said to have spoken the world into existence, and this world emerged from a primordial egg. For them, the egg clearly came first, as it represented the very beginning of all existence. Chinese philosophy, with its emphasis on cyclical thinking and the concept of yin and yang, often approach this question differently. Rather than seeking a linear first cause, Chinese thinkers were more comfortable with the idea of eternal cycles without beginning or end. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei, or natural action, suggested that the chicken-egg relationship was simply part of the natural flow of the universe, requiring no first cause. Ancient Hindu and Buddhist texts also touched on similar themes. The concept of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, resonates with the chicken-egg paradox. In these traditions, the question of what came first might be seen as missing the point entirely. The cycle itself is what's important, not its arbitrary beginning. It's worth noting that in the ancient world, this wasn't considered a trivial question. Philosophers, theologians, and scholars took it very seriously, because it represented a fundamental challenge to human reasoning. If you can't determine which came first in such a seemingly simple scenario, how can you understand causation in more complex situations? The question also had practical implications for ancient thinkers. Understanding causation was crucial for medicine, agriculture, politics, and religion. If you couldn't establish clear cause and effect relationships, how could you make good decisions or understand the will of the gods? As we move forward in history, we'll see how different eras and different discoveries have shed new light on this ancient puzzle. But it's important to remember that for nearly 2,000 years, humans grappled with this question without the benefit of evolutionary theory, genetics, or modern biology. They were working purely with logic, observation, and philosophical reasoning. The ancient origins of this paradox teach us something important about human nature itself. We are creatures who desperately want to understand causation, to find first causes, to make sense of the world around us. The chicken or egg question represents this fundamental drive in its purest form. Now that we understand the historical context, let's dive deep into the logical structure of this paradox. What exactly makes the chicken or egg question so challenging to our rational minds? Why has it stumped philosophers for over 2 millennia? At its core, the chicken or egg paradox is what philosophers call a causal loop or circular causality problem. Here's the basic logical structure. Chickens come from eggs, and eggs come from chickens. Each seems to require the other for its existence, creating what appears to be an infinite regress with no clear starting point. Let's break this down step by step. We say the chicken came first, then we immediately face the question: where did that first chicken come from? In the normal course of events, chickens come from eggs. So if there was no egg to produce the first chicken, how did it come to exist? On the other hand, if we argue that the egg came first, we face the opposite problem. Eggs, at least in the context of this paradox, are produced by chickens. So if there was no chicken to lay the first egg, where did it come from? This creates what logicians call an infinite regress. It's like standing between two mirrors and seeing your reflection bounce back and forth endlessly. Each answer requires the previous existence of the thing you're trying to explain. But here's where it gets really interesting. The chicken or egg paradox is actually a specific example of a broader class of logical problems. Philosophers have identified several different types of paradoxes, and understanding which type this represents helps us approach potential solutions. First, there are logical paradoxes, like the famous liar paradox. This statement is false. If the statement is true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. These paradoxes arise from self-reference and can break logical systems. Then there are semantic paradoxes, which arise from ambiguities in language or meaning. The chicken or egg question might fall into this category if we're not precise about what we mean by chicken or egg. There are also epistemological paradoxes, which challenge what we can know or how we can know it. The chicken or egg question touches on this when we ask how we can determine causation in cyclical systems. But perhaps most relevant to our discussion is the category of metaphysical paradoxes. These challenge our understanding of reality itself, time, causation, and existence. The chicken or egg question is fundamentally about the nature of causation and whether cyclical systems can have first causes. Let's explore the concept of causation more deeply. In classical logic and philosophy, we typically think of causation as linear and temporal. Cause A leads to effect B, which might then become cause C, leading to effect D, and so on. This linear model works well for many situations, but breaks down when we encounter cyclical systems. The chicken or egg scenario presents us with what we might call reciprocal causation. And eggs cause chickens. Neither can exist without the other, at least within the closed system of the paradox as traditionally presented. This type of causation actually appears in many other contexts. Consider language. For example, words get their meaning from their relationship to other words and concepts. But those other words and concepts also depend on more words for their meaning. Where does meaning ultimately come from in language? we have the same chicken or egg problem. Or consider consciousness and the brain. Consciousness appears to emerge from brain activity, but our understanding of the brain depends on conscious observation and thought. Which is more fundamental? Even in physics, we encounter similar paradoxes. In general relativity, mass-energy curves, spacetime, and curved spacetime tells mass-energy how to move. It's a reciprocal relationship where each depends on the other. The chicken or egg paradox also touches on the philosophical concept of infinite regress. If every chicken comes from an egg, and every egg comes from a chicken, then we can trace this chain backward infinitely. But infinite regress makes many philosophers uncomfortable because it seems to deny the possibility of ultimate explanation. Some philosophers have tried to resolve infinite regress by proposing first causes, or unmoved movers. This is essentially the approach taken by the cosmological argument for the existence of God. If everything that exists has a cause, and we can't have infinite regress, then there must be some first cause that itself doesn't require a cause. But applying this logic to the chicken or egg question leads to some interesting implications. If we accept that there must be a first cause, then either the first chicken appeared without being hatched from an egg, or the first egg appeared without being laid by a chicken. Both options seem to violate our normal understanding of how chickens and eggs work. Another way philosophers have approached this problem is through the concept of emergence. Maybe the chicken-egg system as a whole is more fundamental than either component alone. The cycle itself is the basic unit, not the individual chicken or egg. This is similar to how we might think about ecosystems or economic systems, where the relationships and patterns are more important than any individual component. The paradox also raises questions about the nature of time itself. We typically think of causation as temporal, with causes preceding effects. But what if time is cyclical rather than linear? What if the chicken or egg system represents a closed temporal loop where effect becomes cause, becomes effect? This connects to some fascinating ideas in physics about closed time-like curves and the possibility of time travel. If time travel were possible, could an effect precede its own cause? Could a chicken travel back in time to lay the egg from which it hatched? Of course, we shouldn't take these speculative ideas too seriously in the context of actual chickens and eggs. But they illustrate how the simple question of which came first opens up profound questions about the nature of reality, time, and causation. The logical puzzle of the chicken or egg paradox has also influenced formal logic and computer science. Self-referential systems and recursive definitions create similar challenges in these fields. Computer scientists have had to develop sophisticated techniques to handle circular dependencies in software systems and databases. Understanding the logical structure of this paradox is crucial because it helps us see why the question has been so persistent and why it continues to generate new insights. It's not just a silly riddle, but a genuine challenge to some of our most basic assumptions about how causation works. As we'll see in the next section, modern science has provided us with new tools for approaching this ancient puzzle. But the logical insights we've explored here remain relevant and help us understand both the power and the limitations of different types of explanations. Now, let's fast forward from ancient philosophy to the modern scientific era. The landscape of the chicken or egg debate changed dramatically in 1859, when Charles Darwin published On the Origin of Species. For the first time in human history, we had a scientific framework that could potentially resolve this ancient paradox. Darwin's theory of evolution by natural selection provided a completely new way of thinking about the origins of species and the relationships between different life forms. Instead of seeing chickens and eggs as eternal, unchanging categories, evolution revealed them to be the products of a long historical process. But here's the interesting thing. Darwin himself was actually quite cautious about applying his theory to resolve the chicken or egg paradox directly. He understood that evolution worked gradually through small changes over long periods of time. This meant that there was no single moment when a non-chicken suddenly became a chicken. and therefore no definitive answer to which came first. However, modern evolutionary biology has given us much more detailed insights into this question. Let's start with what we now know about the evolutionary history of birds and eggs. Eggs, as it turns out, are much, much older than chickens. The first amniotic eggs, the kind with shells that can be laid on land, appeared around 340 million years ago. These early eggs were produced by the first amniotes, which were the ancestors of modern reptiles, birds, and mammals. Chickens, on the other hand, are relative newcomers to the evolutionary scene. The red jungle fowl, which is the wild ancestor of domestic chickens, evolved around 8 million years ago. Modern domestic chickens have only existed for about 8,000 to 10,000 years, since humans first began domesticating them in Southeast Asia. So if we interpret the question literally, eggs definitely came first by hundreds of millions of years. But wait, there's more complexity here than meets the eye. The question becomes more interesting when we ask specifically about chicken eggs. When did the first chicken egg appear? This is where we need to dive deeper into evolutionary biology and genetics. From a genetic perspective, we can think about this question in terms of mutations and speciation. Every organism inherits genetic material from its parents, but occasionally, mutations occur. Most mutations are neutral or harmful, but occasionally, a beneficial mutation arises that gives an organism an advantage in survival and reproduction. Over long periods of time, the accumulation of mutations can lead to the evolution of new species. But speciation is typically a gradual process, not a sudden event. There's rarely a clear moment when we can say, this organism belongs to a new species. However, for the sake of argument, let's imagine that there was a specific mutation that we could identify as creating the first true chicken. Where would this mutation occur? It would occur in the genetic material of the organism, which would be present from the moment of conception. In other words, the first chicken would have been a chicken from the moment it was conceived, which means it would have been a chicken while it was still developing inside its egg. This suggests that the first chicken egg, containing the first chicken, came before the first chicken hatched. So in this sense, the egg came first. But we can push this analysis even further. What exactly do we mean by a chicken egg? Do we mean an egg laid by a chicken, or an egg containing a chicken? If we define a chicken egg as an egg laid by a chicken, then the chicken came first, because something that wasn't quite a chicken laid the first egg containing a chicken. If we define a chicken egg as an egg containing a chicken, then the egg came first, because the first chicken developed inside an egg before it hatched. This might seem like semantic wordplay, but it actually touches on important questions about how we define species and categories in biology. The reality is that evolution doesn't work with sharp boundaries. Species exist on a continuum, and the boundaries we draw between them are somewhat arbitrary. The ancestors of chickens gradually evolved into chickens over millions of years, with no single generation marking the transition. Modern chickens are descended from the red jungle fowl, Gallus gallus. But even this lineage gradually evolved from earlier bird species, which evolved from theropod dinosaurs, which evolved from earlier reptiles, and so on, back through evolutionary history. Interestingly, recent discoveries in paleontology have revealed that many dinosaurs laid eggs, and some even brooded their eggs, much like modern birds do. In fact, birds are now classified as a group of dinosaurs, which means that in a very real sense, dinosaurs never went extinct. They're still with us in the form of birds. The first bird eggs were probably more similar to modern reptile eggs than to modern bird eggs. They likely had softer shells and were buried in nests rather than being incubated by the parent. Over millions of years, these eggs evolved to become harder shelled, more nutritious, and better suited to aerial life. The chicken or egg question also becomes interesting when we consider it from the perspective of developmental biology. Every chicken begins life as a single fertilized cell inside an egg. This cell contains all the genetic information needed to build a complete chicken, but it's not yet a chicken itself. As the embryo develops inside the egg, It goes through stages that recapitulate some aspects of evolutionary history. Early in development, chicken embryos actually look quite similar to the embryos of other vertebrates, including reptiles and mammals. The distinctive features that make a chicken only appear later in development. This process of embryonic development is controlled by a complex network of genes and proteins. Some of these genes are ancient, shared with many other animals. Others are more recent evolutionary innovations that are specific to birds or even to chickens specifically. From this developmental perspective, the question of which came first becomes even more complex. The genetic program for building a chicken exists from the moment of fertilization, but the actual chicken doesn't emerge until after hatching. The egg provides the environment and resources needed for this developmental program to unfold. Modern genetics has also revealed some fascinating insights about the evolution of eggshells. The proteins that make up eggshells are produced by the female bird, and the genes for these proteins have evolved over millions of years to produce shells with just the right properties strong enough to protect the developing embryo, but weak enough that the chick can break out when it's ready to hatch. Recent research has even identified specific genes and proteins involved in eggshell formation. One protein, called ovoclidin 17, is found only in birds and is crucial for proper eggshell formation. The evolution of genes like this was essential for the development of the hard, shelled eggs that allow birds to reproduce on land. Interestingly, some of the proteins involved in eggshell formation are similar to proteins found in the shells of mollusks and other animals. This suggests that the ability to make shells has evolved independently multiple times in different lineages, a phenomenon called convergent evolution. All of this scientific understanding adds layers of complexity to our simple question. From an evolutionary perspective, eggs are ancient, chickens are recent, and the boundary between chicken and not chicken is gradual rather than sharp. But perhaps most importantly, evolution shows us that the chicken or egg paradox is based on a false premise. It assumes that chickens and eggs are eternal, unchanging categories that exist independently of history. Evolution reveals that both chickens and eggs are products of a long historical process, and their current forms are the result of millions of years of gradual change. This doesn't necessarily resolve the logical paradox entirely, but it does show us that the scientific answer is quite different from the philosophical puzzle that ancient thinkers were grappling with. In 2010, something remarkable happened in the scientific world that seemed to finally provide a definitive answer to our ancient question. Researchers at the University of Sheffield and the University of Warwick published a study that appeared to solve the chicken or egg paradox once and for all. The key was a protein called ovoclidin 17, or OC17 for short. Let me walk you through this groundbreaking research and explain why it seemed to settle the debate, at least from a scientific perspective. Dr. Colin Freeman and his team were studying the formation of eggshells, trying to understand exactly how these remarkable structures are created. Eggshells might look simple, but they're actually incredibly sophisticated biological constructions. They need to be strong enough to protect the developing chick from the outside world, yet structured in such a way that the chick can break out when it's ready to hatch. The researchers discovered that a protein called ovoclidin 17 acts as a catalyst in the formation of eggshells. A catalyst, for those who might need a refresher in chemistry, is a substance that speeds up a chemical reaction without being consumed in the process. In this case, OC17 catalyzes the formation of calcite crystals, which are the main structural component of eggshells. Here's the crucial point. OC17 is only found in the ovaries of chickens. No chicken, no OC17. No OC17, no eggshell. No eggshell, no egg. Therefore, the chicken must have come first. Dr. Freeman was quoted as saying, "It had long been suspected that the egg came first. But now we have the scientific proof that shows that in fact, the chicken came first." The protein had been identified in chickens before, and it was linked to egg formation. But by examining it closely, we have been able to see how it controls the process. This seemed like a slam-dunk scientific resolution to an ancient philosophical problem. The media picked up the story enthusiastically. Headlines around the world proclaimed that science had finally solved the chicken or egg paradox, and the chicken had won. But as often happens in science, the story turned out to be more complex than the initial headlines suggested. Let's dig deeper into what this research actually showed and what its limitations are. First, let's understand what OC17 does in more detail. The protein is secreted by cells in the chicken's oviduct and plays a crucial role in organizing the initial stages of eggshell formation. It helps control the size, shape, and organization of the calcite crystals that form the shell. The eggshell formation process is actually incredibly complex, involving multiple proteins, minerals, and carefully controlled chemical conditions. The shell forms in layers over about 20 hours as the egg moves through the oviduct. OC17 is particularly important in the early stages of this process, helping to nucleate the formation of the first crystal structures. Without OC17, eggs produced by chickens would likely have defective shells or no shells at all. This would be catastrophic for reproduction, as the developing chick would be vulnerable to dehydration, infection, and mechanical damage. So the Sheffield research was certainly significant from a biological perspective. It revealed important details about how eggshells form and highlighted the crucial role of chicken-specific proteins in this process. But does it really resolve the chicken or egg paradox? Let's think about this more carefully. The research shows that modern chicken eggshells require a protein that's only found in chickens. But this doesn't necessarily tell us about the evolutionary history of chickens and eggs. Remember, evolution is a gradual process, and the ancestors of chickens were producing eggs long before OC17 evolved. In fact, many birds produce eggs without OC17. Other bird species have their own versions of shell-forming proteins, some similar to OC17 and others quite different. These proteins have evolved independently in different lineages to solve the same basic problem of creating protective shells around eggs. So while OC17 might be necessary for modern chicken eggs, it's not necessary for eggs in general. The first proto-chicken eggs might have used different proteins or less sophisticated versions of shell-forming proteins. This raises an important point about how we interpret the chicken or egg question. If we're asking specifically about modern domestic chickens and their eggs, then the OC17 research is highly relevant. But if we're asking about the broader evolutionary relationship between birds and eggs, then it's less definitive. There's another layer of complexity here. OC17 didn't just appear out of nowhere. It evolved from earlier proteins through the same gradual process that produced chickens themselves. Genetic analysis suggests that OC17 is related to other proteins found in various animals, including some that aren't involved in egg production at all. This means that the evolution of OC17 and the evolution of chickens were interconnected processes. As proto-chickens evolved, their egg-forming proteins also evolved, eventually leading to the sophisticated OC17 system we see today. From this perspective, asking whether the chicken or the egg came first is like asking whether the chicken or its ability to form eggshells came first. They evolved together as part of an integrated system. The OC17 research also highlights the importance of being precise about what we mean by chicken and egg. If we define a chicken egg specifically as an egg with a shell formed using OC17, then yes, chickens must have come first. But this is a very narrow definition that wouldn't apply to the broader evolutionary question. It's also worth noting that the OC17 research focused on a single protein, but eggshell formation involves dozens of different proteins and other molecules. While OC17 is important, it's part of a larger system that has evolved over millions of years. Recent research has revealed even more complexity in eggshell formation. Different proteins are active at different stages of the process, and they interact with each other in complex ways. Some of these proteins are found only in chickens, while others are shared with other bird species or even with reptiles. This suggests that the evolution of egg-laying ability was a gradual process involving many different innovations, not a single breakthrough involving one protein. Despite these complexities, the OC17 research remains scientifically valuable. It's provided important insights into the mechanics of eggshell formation and highlighted the sophisticated biological systems that make bird reproduction possible. But perhaps more importantly, the research illustrates how modern science can provide new perspectives on ancient questions, even if it doesn't completely resolve the philosophical paradox. It gives us concrete, testable insights into the biological processes underlying chicken and egg formation. The media attention surrounding this research also reveals something interesting about how scientific discoveries are communicated to the public. The desire for simple, definitive answers to complex questions can sometimes lead to oversimplified interpretations of nuanced research. The chicken or egg question has such cultural resonance that any scientific study touching on it is likely to be framed as providing the final answer. But, as we've seen, the reality is usually more complex and interesting than any simple answer would suggest. The OC17 research is a perfect example of how modern molecular biology can illuminate ancient questions in unexpected ways. It doesn't necessarily resolve the philosophical paradox, but it does give us a much deeper understanding of the biological systems involved. As we continue our journey through different approaches to this question, keep in mind how the OC17 discovery illustrates both the power and the limitations of scientific approaches to philosophical problems. Now let's dive even deeper into the molecular world and explore how our understanding of genetics and mutations can shed new light on the chicken or egg paradox. This perspective takes us into the realm of DNA, genes, and the fundamental mechanisms of evolution at the cellular level. To understand the genetic perspective on this question, we need to first grasp some basic sleek principles of genetics and how traits are passed from one generation to the next. Every chicken carries its genetic information in the form of DNA, organized into structures called chromosomes. Chickens have 39 pairs of chromosomes for a total of 78 chromosomes in each cell. This DNA contains roughly 16,000 to 23,000 genes, depending on how you count them, and about 1 billion base pairs of genetic information. When a chicken reproduces, it passes on copies of its genes to its offspring through its eggs or sperm. However, this copying process isn't perfect. Occasionally, errors occur, resulting in mutations. Most mutations are neutral, having no effect on the organism. Some are harmful, reducing the organism's chances of survival and reproduction. But occasionally, a mutation is beneficial, giving the organism some advantage. Over many generations, beneficial mutations can spread through a population through natural selection. This is the basic mechanism of evolution. Genetic variation created by mutation, followed by selection for advantageous traits. Now, let's apply this understanding to our chicken or egg question. Imagine we could trace the evolutionary lineage of chickens backward in time, generation by generation. At some point, we would reach ancestors that we wouldn't quite recognize as chickens. They might be very similar, but they would lack some of the specific traits that define modern chickens. The transition from not quite chicken to chicken would have involved numerous genetic changes accumulating over many generations. But for the sake of argument, let's imagine there was one particular mutation that we could identify as the defining change that created the first true chicken. Where would this mutation occur? It would occur in the DNA of a reproductive cell, either an egg or a sperm. When that cell combined with its partner during fertilization, the resulting embryo would carry the new mutation. This means that the first organism with the defining chicken mutation would have possessed that mutation from the moment of conception. In other words, it would have been a chicken while it was still developing inside its egg. From this genetic perspective, the egg containing the first chicken came before the first chicken hatched. The egg came first. But let's examine this argument more carefully. There are several assumptions built into this reasoning that we should question. First, we're assuming that there was some single defining mutation that created chickens. In reality, the evolution of chickens involved thousands or millions of genetic changes over millions of years. There's no clear dividing line where we can say, this generation was not chicken and this generation is chicken. The boundaries between species are human constructs that we impose on the continuous process of evolution. Evolution doesn't create distinct categories. It creates a branching tree of life where every organism is slightly different from its parents and its offspring. Second, we're assuming that a mutation in a reproductive cell would immediately define the organism as a new species. But speciation is typically a population-level phenomenon, not something that happens in a single individual. A new species emerges when a population becomes reproductively isolated from its parent population and accumulates enough genetic differences to be considered distinct. Third, we're thinking about this question in terms of individual organisms rather than populations. Evolution operates on populations, not individuals. The first chicken wasn't a single individual, but rather the first population of organisms that we would recognize as chickens. Despite these complications, the genetic perspective does offer some interesting insights into the chicken or egg question. Recent advances in genomics have allowed scientists to sequence and compare the genomes of chickens with their wild relatives and more distant evolutionary cousins. This has revealed the genetic changes that occurred during chicken evolution and domestication. For example, we know that domestic chickens differ from their wild ancestor, the red jungle fowl, in several key genes. Some of these differences affect physical appearance, such as the genes that control feather, color, and pattern. Others affect behavior, such as genes involved in aggression and fear responses. One particularly interesting discovery is that the domestication of chickens involved changes in genes that affect thyroid hormone signaling. These hormones play important roles in development, metabolism, and reproduction. Changes in thyroid signaling may have been crucial for the evolution of the domestic chicken's distinctive traits. Scientists have also identified genes that are important for egg production in chickens. Some of these genes affect the number of eggs a hen lays, while others influence egg size, shell strength, and other characteristics. By studying the evolutionary history of these genes, researchers can piece together the story of how chickens and their eggs evolved together. This research suggests that many of the genetic innovations important for chicken reproduction evolved gradually over long periods of time. The genetic perspective also reveals the incredible complexity of even simple traits like egg laying. Egg production involves the coordinated action of hundreds of genes, controlling everything from the development of reproductive organs to the production of eggshell proteins to the hormonal regulation of ovulation. Each of these genes has its own evolutionary history. Some are ancient, shared with many other animals. Others are more recent innovations specific to birds or even to chickens specifically. The modern chicken genome is a patchwork of genetic elements with different evolutionary origins and ages. This genomic complexity reinforces the point that there was no single moment when chickens suddenly appeared. Instead, chickenness emerged gradually through the accumulation of many genetic changes over long periods of time. Modern genetic research has also revealed some surprising connections between chickens and other animals. For example, despite their obvious differences, chickens and mammals share many fundamental genetic mechanisms. The genes that control early development in chicken embryos are equally similar to those that control development in mouse or human embryos. This suggests that many of the basic molecular mechanisms of life evolved early in the history of life and have been conserved across very different lineages. The ability to produce eggs, for instance, involves some genetic mechanisms that are shared between chickens and other egg-laying animals like reptiles and fish. At the same time, chickens have also evolved some unique genetic innovations. The OC17 protein we discussed earlier is just one example. Chickens have evolved specialized genes for producing the proteins, lipids, and other molecules that make up their distinctive eggs. The genetic perspective on the chicken or egg question also connects to broader questions in evolutionary biology. How do new species arise? How do complex traits like reproduction evolve? How does genetic variation translate into the diversity of life we see around us? These are active areas of research, and our understanding continues to evolve as new technologies allow us to probe deeper into the molecular basis of life. Techniques like CRISPR gene editing are even allowing scientists to experimentally test hypotheses about how genetic changes affect development and evolution. One fascinating recent development is the ability to sequence ancient DNA from fossils and archaeological specimens. This has allowed researchers to trace the genetic history of chickens and other domesticated animals with unprecedented precision. For example, scientists have sequenced DNA from chicken bones found at archaeological sites, revealing how chickens spread around the world and how their genetics changed during domestication. This research is providing new insights into the coevolution of humans and domestic animals. The genetic perspective on the chicken or egg question ultimately reinforces the evolutionary answer. Eggs are much older than chickens. And both modern chickens and their eggs are the products of long evolutionary processes involving countless genetic changes. But perhaps more importantly, this perspective reveals the incredible complexity and interconnectedness of biological systems. The simple question of which came first opens up into a vast landscape of molecular mechanisms, evolutionary processes, and genetic innovations that scientists are still working to understand. Throughout human history, the chicken or egg question has intersected with religious and mythological worldviews in fascinating ways. Different cultures and belief systems have approached this paradox through the lens of creation stories, divine intervention, and spiritual symbolism. Let's explore how various religious traditions have grappled with this question and what their answers reveal about different ways of understanding existence and causation. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, the answer might seem straightforward based on the creation account in the book of Genesis. According to Genesis 1:20-22, on the fifth day of creation, God created the birds of the air. The text states, "And God said, Let the waters bring forth abundantly the moving creature that hath life, and fowl that may fly above the earth in the open firmament of heaven. And God created great whales, and every living creature that moveth, which the waters brought forth abundantly after their kind, and every winged fowl after his kind." From this literal interpretation, birds, including what would eventually become chickens, were created as fully formed adult creatures. They didn't need to hatch from eggs. They were spoken into existence by divine command. Therefore, in this view, the chicken came first. However, this interpretation raises interesting theological questions. If God created adult birds first, when did eggs enter the picture? The Genesis account doesn't specifically mention the creation of eggs, but it does say that God blessed the creatures and told them to be fruitful and multiply. This suggests that reproductive mechanisms, including egg-laying, were part of God's original design for birds. Different Christian theologians throughout history have interpreted these passages in various ways. Some have taken a strictly literal approach, arguing that all species were created simultaneously in their current forms. Others have embraced what's called theistic evolution, suggesting that God used evolutionary processes as the mechanism of creation. St. Augustine, one of the most influential early Christian theologians, actually wrestled with questions very similar to the chicken or egg paradox in his writings. In The City of God, Augustine discussed the relationship between God's eternal plan and the temporal unfolding of creation. He was comfortable with the idea that God could work through natural processes over time, which might allow for evolutionary development. Thomas Aquinas, the great medieval philosopher-theologian, approached this type of question through his concept of primary and secondary causation. In Aquinas' framework, God is the primary cause of all existence, while natural processes are secondary causes. From this perspective, both chickens and eggs exist because God wills them to exist. but they might come into being through natural processes that God established. Modern Catholic teaching, as expressed in documents like Pope Pius XII's encyclical Humani Generis, and more recent papal statements, generally accepts evolutionary theory as compatible with Christian faith, while maintaining that God is the ultimate source and purpose of all creation. In Islamic theology, the creation account in the Quran shares similarities with the biblical narrative, but also has some distinctive elements. The Quran speaks of Allah creating all living things in pairs and establishing the natural order of reproduction. Islamic scholars have generally been open to scientific discoveries about the natural world, viewing them as revealing the wisdom and complexity of Allah's creation. The great Islamic philosopher and scientist Ibn Sina, known in the West as Avicenna, wrote extensively about causation and the natural world in ways that prefigured later philosophical discussions of the chicken or egg problem. He was particularly interested in the relationship between essential and accidental properties of things, which relates to questions about what makes a chicken a chicken. Jewish theological perspectives on creation have always emphasized the ongoing nature of God's creative activity. The Hebrew concept of bara, meaning to create, suggests not just an initial act of creation, but a continuing process. This dynamic view of creation has made it easier for many Jewish thinkers to integrate evolutionary understanding with religious faith. The Talmud, the vast collection of Jewish law and commentary, actually contains discussions that touch on questions similar to the chicken or egg paradox. Rabbinical debates about the nature of causation, the relationship between potential and actual, and the meaning of first in various contexts show that Jewish scholars have long been comfortable with complex, nuanced answers to seemingly simple questions. Eastern religious traditions offer yet another perspective on this question. In Hinduism, the concept of cyclical time and eternal cosmic cycles provides a different framework for thinking about origins and causation. The Hindu creation myths speak of the cosmic egg, or Hiranyagarbha, from which the universe emerges. In some versions of these stories, the creator god Brahma emerges from a golden egg that appears in the primordial waters. This suggests a cosmic precedence of eggs over the creatures that emerge from them. However, Hindu philosophy is also comfortable with paradox and cyclical causation. The concept of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, suggests that asking about ultimate origins might be missing the point. From this perspective, the chicken-egg cycle is simply part of the eternal dance of existence, with no beginning and no end. The Upanishads, ancient Hindu philosophical texts, contain discussions about the nature of causation and the relationship between cause and effect that are remarkably sophisticated. These texts explore questions about whether the effect pre-exists in the cause, whether causation requires temporal sequence, and whether apparent paradoxes might point to deeper truths about the nature of reality. Buddhist philosophy, with its emphasis on dependent origination or pratyaya samputa, offers perhaps the most nuanced approach to the chicken or egg question. According to this doctrine, all phenomena arise in dependence upon multiple causes and conditions. Nothing exists independently or has an ultimate first cause. From a Buddhist perspective, asking which came first, the chicken or the egg, might be seen as an example of what Buddhists call wrong view, a way of thinking that assumes independent, inherent existence for phenomena that actually exist only in relationship to other phenomena. The Buddha himself was famously reluctant to answer certain metaphysical questions, including questions about ultimate origins. He compared such questions to a person shot by a poisoned arrow, who refuses medical treatment until he knows who shot the arrow, what kind of wood it was made from, and so on. The Buddha suggested that some questions are not conducive to liberation and enlightenment, and that we should focus on practical wisdom instead. However, Buddhist philosophy does offer sophisticated analyses of causation through concepts like the 12 links of dependent origination. This framework shows how ignorance leads to suffering through a complex web of interconnected causes and effects. But it doesn't require identifying any ultimate first cause. Chinese religious and philosophical traditions, including Taoism and Confucianism, have their own approaches to questions of origin and causation. The Tao Te Ching, the foundational text of Taoism, begins with the famous lines, "The Tao that can be named is not the eternal." Tao, the name that can be named, is not the eternal name. This suggests that ultimate reality transcends the categories and distinctions we normally use to understand the world. Taoist thinking emphasizes the complementary nature of opposites and the importance of balance and harmony. From this perspective, asking which came first, the chicken or the egg, might be seen as imposing artificial distinctions on what is actually a unified process. The concept of Wu Wei, often translated as non-action or effortless action, suggests that natural processes unfold spontaneously without requiring external intervention or ultimate first causes. The chicken-egg cycle might be seen as an example of Wu Wei in action, a natural process that sustains itself without beginning or end. Confucian thought, with its emphasis on social harmony and moral cultivation, has generally been less concerned with metaphysical questions about ultimate origins. However, Confucian scholars have been interested in questions about the relationship between human nature and moral development, which involve similar questions about whether virtues are innate or acquired. Indigenous religious traditions around the world offer yet another set of perspectives on creation and causation. Many of these traditions emphasize the interconnectedness of all life and the importance of maintaining balance and reciprocity with the natural world. Native American creation stories often feature themes of emergence and transformation rather than creation ex nihilo. In many of these stories, the current world emerges from previous worlds through a process of growth and development. Animals often play important roles as teachers, guides, and participants in the creative process. From these perspectives, questions about which came first might be less important than understanding the relationships and responsibilities that connect all living beings. The chicken-egg question might be seen as an opportunity to reflect on the web of relationships that sustain life, rather than a puzzle to be solved with a definitive answer. African traditional religions, with their emphasis on ancestral wisdom and community continuity, often approach questions of origin through genealogical and communal frameworks. The relationship between ancestors and descendants, between elders and children, provides models for thinking about causation and continuity that don't require identifying ultimate first causes. Australian Aboriginal Dreamtime stories describe a time when ancestral beings traveled across the land, creating geographical features and establishing the laws and customs that govern relationships between humans, animals, and the natural world. These stories often emphasize ongoing relationships and responsibilities rather than linear sequences of cause and effect. What's fascinating about surveying these diverse religious and mythological perspectives is how they reveal different assumptions about the nature of time, causation, and existence itself. Some traditions emphasize linear time and definitive origins, while others embrace cyclical time and eternal processes. Some seek ultimate first causes, while others are comfortable with interdependence and mutual causation. These different approaches don't just represent different answers to the chicken or egg question. They represent fundamentally different ways of understanding. What kinds of questions are worth asking, and what kinds of answers are satisfying? The religious and mythological perspectives on this question also reveal the deep human need to place our existence within larger frameworks of meaning and purpose. Whether we see chickens and eggs as products of divine creation, evolutionary development, or eternal cycles, we're really asking questions about our own place in the cosmos and the nature of reality itself. As we continue our exploration of this ancient paradox, it's worth keeping in mind how these diverse spiritual and cultural perspectives enrich our understanding. They remind us that purely scientific or logical approaches, while valuable, don't exhaust the ways humans have found meaning in this deceptively simple question. As we've journeyed through ancient origins, logical structures, scientific discoveries, and religious perspectives, we now turn to how modern philosophers have approached the chicken or egg paradox. Contemporary philosophical thinking has brought new tools, concepts, and frameworks to bear on this ancient question, revealing layers of complexity that earlier thinkers couldn't have imagined. Modern philosophy has been deeply influenced by advances in logic, language analysis, and our understanding of concepts like time, causation, and identity. These developments have allowed philosophers to dissect the chicken or egg question with unprecedented precision, revealing that what seems like a single, simple question actually contains multiple distinct problems. Let's start with analytic philosophy, which has dominated much of 20th and 21st century philosophical thinking, particularly in the English-speaking world. Analytic philosophers are known for their careful attention to language, logic, and conceptual clarity. They've approached the chicken or egg paradox by asking, what exactly are we asking when we pose this question? One crucial insight from analytic philosophy is the importance of distinguishing between different types of questions. Are we asking a biological question about the evolutionary history of chickens and eggs, a logical question about circular causation, a semantic question about how we define categories like chicken and egg, or a metaphysical question about the nature of causation itself? The philosopher of science, Karl Popper, famous for his work on the logic of scientific discovery, would likely approach this question by asking what would count as evidence for different possible answers. Popper emphasized that truly scientific questions must be falsifiable. There must be possible observations that could prove them wrong. From this perspective, the evolutionary version of the chicken or egg question is genuinely scientific because we can examine fossil evidence, genetic data, and comparative biology to determine the historical sequence of events. The logical version of the question, however, might not be scientific in Popper's sense, because it's more about the structure of reasoning than about empirical facts. Ludwig Wittgenstein, one of the most influential philosophers of the 20th century, would probably have been skeptical of the chicken or egg question altogether. Wittgenstein was famous for arguing that many traditional philosophical problems arise from confusion about language rather than genuine puzzles about reality. In his later work, Wittgenstein developed the idea of language games, the notion that the meaning of words depends on how they're used in specific contexts and practices. From this perspective, we might ask, in what language game does the chicken or egg question make sense? What are we really trying to do when we ask this question? If we're playing the language game of evolutionary biology, then chicken and egg have specific technical meanings related to taxonomy and reproductive biology, and the question has a clear scientific answer. If we're playing the language game of logical puzzles, then these words function differently, and we're really exploring the structure of circular reasoning. If we're playing the language game of casual conversation or humor, then the question might be more about entertainment than about seeking a definitive answer. Wittgenstein might suggest that confusion arises when we mix up these different language games, expecting a single answer to work across all contexts. The philosopher W.V.O. Quine made important contributions to our understanding of how we individuate and classify objects in the world. His famous thought experiment about Gavagai, a word used by a hypothetical tribe that might refer to rabbits, or parts of rabbits, or temporal stages of rabbits, illustrates how our conceptual schemes shape what we take to be the basic furniture of reality. Applied to the chicken or egg question, Quine might ask, are chickens and eggs really distinct objects? Or are they just different temporal stages of a single four-dimensional entity extended through time? Our ordinary language treats them as separate things, but physics and metaphysics might suggest a different picture. Modern metaphysics has indeed grappled with questions about persistence through time that are relevant to our paradox. If a chicken exists as a temporally extended four-dimensional worm, stretching from its conception to its death, then the question of whether the chicken or the egg came first becomes a question about which temporal part of this extended entity we choose to focus on. The philosopher David Lewis, famous for his work on modal realism and possible worlds, might approach the chicken or egg question by asking, in which possible worlds do chickens come first, and in which do eggs come first? This framework allows us to consider counterfactual scenarios and explore the logical space of possibilities. Lewis might point out that there are possible worlds where chickens evolved differently, or where the laws of biology work differently, leading to different answers to our question. The actual answer in our world depends on the particular historical and biological facts that happen to obtain here. Contemporary philosophy of science has also brought new perspectives to questions about causation and explanation. The philosopher Wesley Salmon developed influential theories about causal explanation that distinguish between different types of causal relationships. Salmon might analyze the chicken-egg relationship in terms of causal processes and interactions. From this perspective, both chickens and eggs are parts of ongoing causal processes that extend through time and space. The question isn't which came first in some absolute sense, but how these processes are structured and how they interact with other processes in the world. The philosopher of biology, Elliot Sober, has written extensively about evolutionary explanations and the structure of biological reasoning. Sober would likely emphasize that evolutionary questions require thinking about populations and statistical trends rather than individual organisms. From this perspective, the chicken or egg question is really asking about the evolutionary history of reproductive strategies in bird lineages. This is a perfectly legitimate scientific question, but it requires understanding evolution as a population-level phenomenon rather than something that happens to individual chickens and eggs. Feminist philosophers have brought attention to how seemingly neutral philosophical questions often embed particular assumptions about power, value, and perspective. A feminist analysis of the chicken or egg question might ask, why has this particular paradox received so much attention throughout history? What does our fascination with this question reveal about our assumptions and values? Some feminist philosophers might point out that eggs have often been associated with female reproductive capacity, while chickens have been associated with male dominance and aggression. The way we frame and answer the chicken or egg question might reflect broader cultural attitudes about gender, reproduction, and the natural world. Environmental philosophers have developed new ways of thinking about the relationships between organisms and their environments that are relevant to our question. Rather than treating chickens and eggs as isolated objects, environmental philosophy emphasizes the web of relationships that connect organisms to their ecosystems. From this perspective, asking which came first, the chicken or the egg, might miss the more important questions about how these organisms relate to their environment, what ecological roles they play, and how their evolution has been shaped by environmental pressures and opportunities. Philosophy of mind has grappled with questions about emergence and reduction that parallel the chicken or egg problem in interesting ways. Just as we ask whether chickens or eggs are more fundamental, philosophers of mind ask whether mental phenomena emerge from brain activity, or whether consciousness is somehow more basic than physical processes. The philosopher David Chalmers, famous for his work on the hard problem of consciousness, might approach the chicken or egg question as an example of how emergence works in biological systems. Complex organisms like chickens emerge from simpler components and processes, but they also have causal powers that influence their environment, including their ability to produce eggs. This creates what philosophers call downward causation, higher-level phenomena influencing lower-level processes. Chickens produce eggs, but they also influence their own cellular processes, gene expression, and even evolutionary trajectory through their behavior and interactions with the environment. Postmodern philosophers have challenged traditional approaches to questions like the chicken or egg paradox by questioning the assumptions underlying the question itself. A postmodern analysis might ask, who benefits from framing the question this way? What power structures or cultural narratives are reinforced by seeking a definitive answer? Postmodernists might be more interested in the social and cultural functions of the chicken or egg question than in solving it. How has this question been used in different historical contexts? What does our persistent fascination with it reveal about Western culture's obsession with origins, causation, and definitive answers? Pragmatist philosophers, following in the tradition of William James and John Dewey, would probably approach the chicken or egg question by asking, what practical difference does the answer make? If knowing which came first doesn't help us solve real problems or improve human life, then maybe we're asking the wrong question. A pragmatist might redirect our attention to more practical questions. How can we improve chicken welfare in agricultural systems? How can we use our understanding of reproduction and development to address food security? How can the study of evolutionary processes help us solve contemporary problems? Continental philosophy, with its emphasis on phenomenology, existentialism, and hermeneutics, offers yet another perspective on our paradox. A phenomenologist might ask, what is the lived experience of encountering the chicken or egg question? How does this question reveal something about the structure of human consciousness and our relationship to temporality? An existentialist might see the chicken or egg question as an example of the human tendency to seek ultimate foundations and certainties in a world that is fundamentally contingent and ambiguous. From this perspective, the anxiety we feel when confronted with circular causation reflects our broader existential situation as beings thrown into a world we didn't choose and don't fully understand. Our hermeneutic approach might emphasize the historical and cultural contexts in which the chicken or egg question has been asked and answered. Different eras and cultures have understood this question differently. And these differences reveal something important about how human understanding works. Recent developments in philosophy of time have also shed new light on questions about causation and temporal ordering. If time is fundamentally different from how we normally experience it, if the past, present, and future are all equally real, as some interpretations of physics suggest, then asking which came first might be based on an illusion about the nature of time itself. Some philosophers have suggested that causation itself might not be as fundamental as we usually assume. If the world consists of timeless mathematical relationships rather than temporal sequences of causes and effects, then questions about which came first become meaningless or irrelevant. These modern philosophical perspectives don't necessarily provide a single definitive answer to the chicken or egg question, but they do something arguably more valuable. They help us understand what we're really asking when we pose this ancient paradox, and they reveal the rich conceptual landscape that lies beneath this seemingly simple question. Perhaps most importantly, modern philosophy shows us that the chicken or egg question isn't really about chickens and eggs at all. It's about causation, time, identity, language, and the fundamental structure of reality itself. It's a window into some of the deepest and most persistent questions in human thought. Now we venture into perhaps the most mind-bending perspective on our ancient paradox, the realm of quantum mechanics. At first glance, quantum physics might seem irrelevant to questions about chickens and eggs. After all, quantum effects typically become important only at the scale of atoms and subatomic particles, while chickens and eggs are macroscopic biological systems. However, quantum mechanics has revolutionized our understanding of causality, determinism, and the nature of reality itself, providing surprising new angles on our timeless question. To understand how quantum mechanics relates to the chicken or egg paradox, we need to first grasp some of the key insights that quantum theory has revealed about the nature of causation and temporal ordering. In classical physics, the world operates according to deterministic laws. Few know the exact position and momentum of every particle in the universe at any given moment. You can, in principle, calculate the state of the universe at any other moment, past or future. Causation flows clearly from past to future, and events have definite objective sequences. Quantum mechanics shattered this classical picture. At the quantum level, we discover that particles don't have definite properties until they're measured. The famous double-slit experiment shows that a photon or electron can apparently pass through two slits simultaneously. existing in a superposition of different states until observation forces it to collapse into a definite state. This quantum indeterminacy might seem to have little relevance to our chicken or egg question, but it actually opens up fascinating possibilities. If the fundamental level of reality is characterized by superposition and indeterminacy, what does this mean for our understanding of causation and temporal sequence? One of the most striking features of quantum mechanics is the phenomenon of entanglement. When two particles become entangled, measuring one particle instantly affects the other, regardless of the distance separating them. Einstein famously called this spooky action at a distance, and was deeply uncomfortable with its implications. Quantum entanglement seems to challenge our ordinary notions of locality and causality. If measuring a particle here can instantly affect a particle on the other side of the galaxy, what does this mean for our understanding of cause and effect? Some interpretations of quantum mechanics suggest even more radical possibilities. The many worlds interpretation proposed by Hugh Everett III suggests that all possible quantum outcomes actually occur, but in parallel universes or alternate realities. From this perspective, there might be universes where chickens came first, other universes where eggs came first, and still others where both appeared simultaneously. The many worlds interpretation would suggest that asking which came first, the chicken or the egg, is like asking which outcome occurred in a quantum measurement. The answer is, all possible outcomes occurred just in different branches of the multiverse. Another relevant concept from quantum mechanics is the idea of retroactive causation or retrocausality. Some interpretations of quantum experiments suggest that future measurements can influence past events. The famous delayed choice quantum eraser experiments seem to show that decisions made after a photon has passed through an apparatus can retroactively determine whether it behaved like a wave or a particle. If retrocausality is real, then the chicken or egg question becomes even more complex. Maybe the first chicken came into existence because future chickens were going to lay eggs, creating a causal loop that extends backward in time. Or perhaps the first egg appeared because future eggs were going to hatch into chickens. This might sound like science fiction, but some serious physicists and philosophers have explored these possibilities. The physicist John Wheeler, who coined the term black hole and made fundamental contributions to quantum theory, is fascinated by the possibility that the future might influence the past in quantum systems. Wheeler proposed the idea of a participatory universe in which observation and measurement play fundamental roles in creating reality. From this perspective, the chicken or egg question might not have a definite answer until someone asks it and performs the observations necessary to determine the answer. The concept of quantum superposition also offers a novel perspective on our paradox. In the quantum world, particles can exist in superpositions of multiple states simultaneously. An electron can be spinning both clockwise and counterclockwise until measured. A photon can be traveling multiple paths simultaneously until detected. Could biological systems exhibit similar superposition effects? Most physicists would say no, at least not at the macroscopic level. The process of decoherence, where quantum systems interact with their environment and lose their quantum properties, happens very quickly for large, warm, complex systems like living organisms. However, there's growing evidence that quantum effects might play important roles in certain biological processes. Quantum tunneling appears to be crucial for enzyme function. Quantum entanglement might be involved in photosynthesis and bird navigation. Some researchers have even proposed that consciousness itself might depend on quantum processes in the brain. If quantum effects are important in biology, then we might need to rethink our understanding of biological causation. Maybe there are situations where a chicken could exist in a superposition of having come from an egg, and not having come from an egg until some measurement or observation forces it into a definite state. This is admittedly highly speculative, but it illustrates how quantum mechanics challenges our ordinary assumptions about causation and determinism in ways that might be relevant to seemingly classical problems like the chicken or egg paradox. The quantum Zeno effect provides another interesting perspective on our question. This effect, named after the ancient Greek philosopher Zeno, who proposed various paradoxes about motion and time, occurs when frequent measurements prevent a quantum system from evolving. By constantly observing a quantum system, you can effectively freeze its evolution. Applied metaphorically to our chicken or egg question, we might ask, does constantly asking which came first prevent us from understanding the actual evolutionary and causal processes involved? Maybe the question itself interferes with our ability to see the answer clearly. Quantum field theory, which combines quantum mechanics with special relativity, reveals even more surprising features of the quantum world. In quantum field theory, particles can be created and destroyed, and the vacuum itself is filled with virtual particles that constantly pop into and out of existence. These virtual particles play real physical roles, contributing to measurable effects like the Casimir force and the anomalous magnetic moment of the electron. They also participate in processes like pair production, where a photon with sufficient energy can create an electron-positron pair from apparently empty space. If particles can be created from the quantum vacuum, what does this mean for our understanding of origins and first causes? Maybe the question of which came first, the chicken or the egg, is based on the false assumption that things need to have classical, definite origins. In the quantum world, particles and processes can emerge from the underlying quantum foam, without requiring pre-existing classical causes. The concept of quantum tunneling also provides an interesting perspective on causation and temporal sequence. In quantum tunneling, particle can pass through an energy barrier that should be impossible to cross according to classical physics. The particle doesn't gradually climb over the barrier, simply appears on the other side without having traveled through the intervening space. Some interpretations of quantum tunneling suggest that the tunneling process takes zero time or even negative time. If time can flow backward or become meaningless in quantum processes, what does this imply for questions about temporal sequence and causation? Bell's theorem, one of the most important results in quantum mechanics, shows that any physical theory that reproduces the predictions of quantum mechanics must be either non-local or non-realistic. This has profound implications for our understanding of causation. If the world is fundamentally non-local, then causes and effects don't need to be connected through chains of local influences. If the world is non-realistic, then asking which came first might be meaningless till someone performs the measurements necessary to make chickens and eggs real. The interpretation of quantum mechanics remains a subject of intense debate among physicists and philosophers. The Copenhagen interpretation, many worlds interpretation, pilot wave theory, and various other approaches offer different pictures of quantum reality, each with different implications for causation and determinism. Some interpretations, like the Copenhagen interpretation, emphasize the fundamental role of measurement and observation. Others, like the many worlds interpretation, maintain determinism, but at the cost of accepting parallel realities. Still others, like pilot wave theory, restore classical determinism but require non-local hidden variables. Each of these interpretations would provide a different perspective on the chicken or egg question, illustrating how our deepest theories about the nature of reality influence our approach to even seemingly mundane problems. It's important to note that these quantum mechanical perspectives on the chicken or egg paradox are largely speculative. We don't have any evidence that macroscopic biological systems, like chickens and eggs, exhibit significant quantum effects that would change our understanding of their evolutionary and causal relationships. However, quantum mechanics does provide us with new conceptual tools for thinking about causation, determinism, and the nature of reality. These tools might not directly solve the chicken or egg paradox, but they do show us that our ordinary assumptions about causation and temporal sequence might be more limited and context-dependent than we usually assume. Perhaps most importantly, quantum mechanics teaches us humility about the nature of reality. If the fundamental level of the physical world is characterized by indeterminacy, non-locality, and observer dependence, Then our everyday concepts of causation and sequence might be approximations that work well in certain contexts, but break down in others. The chicken or egg question, viewed through the lens of quantum mechanics, becomes a reminder that reality might be far stranger and more subtle than our ordinary experience suggests. While quantum effects probably don't directly influence the evolutionary relationship between chickens and eggs, they do challenge us to think more carefully about what we mean by causation, reality, and temporal sequence. As we continue to explore the implications of quantum mechanics for our understanding of the world, we might discover that questions about origins and first causes need to be reformulated in ways that take into account the peculiar features of quantum reality. The chicken or egg paradox, in its quantum incarnation, might point toward fundamentally new ways of understanding the relationship between cause and effect, time and causation, and question and answer. In our digital age, artificial intelligence and computational thinking have provided entirely new approaches to age-old questions. The chicken or egg paradox has found new life in the world of computer science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence, where similar circular dependency problems arise regularly and where new computational tools offer novel ways to analyze complex causal relationships. Let's start by examining how the chicken or egg problem manifests in computer science and software engineering. Programmers regularly encounter what they call circular dependencies, or bootstrap problems, that are structurally identical to our ancient paradox. Consider a simple example. You're building a compiler, a program that translates high-level programming code into machine code. But to build the compiler, you need to write it in a programming language, and to run that programming language, you need a compiler. Which comes first, the compiler or the programming language? This is a real problem that early computer scientists had to solve. The solution involved a process called bootstrapping, where you create a minimal, basic version of one component. Use it to build a slightly more sophisticated version, and then iterate until you have the full system you want. The term bootstrap comes from the phrase pulling yourself up by your bootstraps, which describes exactly this kind of seemingly impossible circular process. Software systems are full of circular dependencies. Operating systems need applications to be useful, but applications need operating systems to run. Databases need data to be valuable, but data needs databases to be stored and accessed. Web browsers need websites to browse, but websites need browsers to be viewed. The field of software engineering has developed sophisticated techniques for managing these circular dependencies. Dependency injection, abstract interfaces, and modular design patterns all help programmers create systems where components can be developed and tested independently, even when they ultimately depend on each other. These computational solutions offer interesting perspectives on the biological chicken or egg problem. Maybe the answer isn't to identify which came first, but to understand how the system bootstrapped itself from simpler components. Just as programmers can build complex software systems through iterative development, evolution might have built the chicken-egg system through gradual bootstrapping from simpler reproductive mechanisms. Artificial intelligence and machine learning introduce even more fascinating parallels to our paradox. Consider the training of neural networks, the computational systems that power modern AI applications from image recognition to language translation. Neural networks learn by adjusting their internal parameters based on training data. But to learn effectively, they need good training data. And to generate good training data, you often need systems that already understand the problem domain. Which comes first, the intelligent system or the data it learns from? This chicken or egg problem appears throughout machine learning. To build a system that can recognize cats in photos, you need thousands of photos labeled as cat or not cat. But to create those labels efficiently, it would be helpful to have a system that can already recognize cats. The solution, as in many computational bootstrap problems, involves iterative improvement and clever initialization strategies. You start with a rough, imperfect system. Use it to generate better training data or labels. Then use that improved data to train a better system. And repeat until you achieve the desired performance. This process is called active learning, or self-supervised learning, and it's become one of the most powerful techniques in modern AI. Systems like GPT-3 and GPT-4, the large language models that power advanced chatbots, were trained using variations of this bootstrap approach, where the model learns to predict its own outputs and gradually improves its performance. The field of evolutionary computation provides another computational perspective on our paradox. Evolutionary algorithms, also called genetic algorithms, use principles inspired by biological evolution to solve complex optimization problems. In an evolutionary algorithm, you start with a population of random solutions to a problem. You evaluate how well each solution performs, select the best ones to reproduce, combine and mutate them to create new solutions, and repeat the process over many generations. Over time, the population of solutions evolves to become better and better at solving the target problem. But here's the interesting parallel to our chicken or egg question. Evolutionary algorithms need both a population of solutions and a way to generate new solutions from existing ones. Which comes first in setting up an evolutionary algorithm? The answer, as you might expect by now, involves bootstrap strategies. You start with randomly generated solutions. Use them to create the next generation and let the evolutionary process gradually improve both the solutions and the mechanisms for generating new solutions. Some advanced evolutionary algorithms even evolve their own reproduction mechanisms. Not only do the solutions improve over time, but the ways of creating new solutions from old ones also evolve. This creates a kind of meta-evolution, where the process of evolution itself evolves. Recent advances in artificial life and computational biology have created even more sophisticated models of biological processes that can shed light on our chicken or egg question. Researchers have built computer simulations of evolving ecosystems where digital organisms reproduce, mutate, and compete for resources. In these digital worlds, researchers can observe the evolution of reproduction mechanisms in real time. They can see how simple self-replicating programs gradually develop more sophisticated ways of creating copies of themselves, including the evolution of separate parent and offspring stages that parallel the relationship between chickens and eggs. One of the most famous experiments in artificial life was conducted by Tom Ray in the 1990s. Ray created a computer system called Tierra, where digital organisms competed for memory and CPU time. These digital creatures were actually computer programs that could replicate themselves by copying their own code. What Ray discovered was remarkable. The digital organisms evolved. They developed shorter, more efficient replication code. Some evolved to become parasites, stealing replication machinery from other organisms. Others evolved immunity to parasites. Still others evolved to become hyperparasites, exploiting the parasites themselves. Most relevant to our chicken or egg discussion, Ray observed the evolution of increasingly sophisticated reproduction mechanisms. Simple self-copying programs evolved into more complex systems with distinct phases of reproduction, including mechanisms that resemble the separation between parent and offspring that we see in biological reproduction. These artificial life experiments suggest that the chicken-egg relationship might not be as paradoxical as it initially appears. In computational simulations, researchers have observed the gradual evolution of complex reproductive cycles from simple self-replication, showing how circular dependencies can emerge naturally through evolutionary processes. Machine learning has also provided new tools for analyzing causal relationships in complex systems. Traditional statistics often struggles with causation. As the famous saying goes, correlation does not imply causation. But new techniques in causal inference, many developed for machine learning applications, are providing more sophisticated ways to untangle cause and effect relationships. Methods like causal graph learning, do calculus, and counterfactual reasoning allow researchers to infer causal relationships from observational data, even in situations with feedback loops and circular dependencies. These techniques could potentially be applied to biological data to better understand the evolutionary relationship between different reproductive strategies. For example, researchers could use these causal inference techniques to analyze genetic and fossil data. Building causal models that show how different reproductive mechanisms influenced each other during evolution, rather than asking which came first in a simple linear sense. These models could reveal the complex web of causal relationships that led to modern reproductive systems. Deep learning, the branch of machine learning behind many recent AI breakthroughs, offers another perspective on our paradox. Deep neural networks are trained through a process called backpropagation, where errors are propagated backward through the network to adjust the parameters that generated them. This creates a kind of circular causality. The network's outputs influence its inputs, which influence its outputs, which influence its inputs, and so on. The network bootstraps itself to better performance through this circular feedback process. Recent developments in self-supervised learning have pushed this circularity even further. In self-supervised learning, AI systems learn by predicting parts of their input data from other parts. A language model might learn by predicting the next word in a sentence. Or an image recognition system might learn by predicting missing parts of images. These systems essentially learn to understand the world by learning to understand themselves. They bootstrap their knowledge through circular processes where their current understanding helps them learn better understanding, which helps them learn even better understanding, and so on. The field of artificial general intelligence research grapples with chicken or egg problems at a fundamental level. To create truly intelligent systems, researchers believe we need systems that can learn and reason about any domain. But to learn effectively, systems need some initial knowledge and reasoning capabilities. Which comes first, intelligence or learning? Different approaches to AGI reflect different answers to this question. Some researchers emphasize starting with powerful learning algorithms and letting intelligence emerge from experience. Others focus on building in sophisticated initial knowledge and reasoning capabilities. Still others try to bootstrap intelligence through interaction between multiple simple agents. The recent success of large language models like GPT-3 and GPT-4 represents a particular approach to this bootstrap problem. These systems start with relatively simple neural network architectures, but are trained on enormous amounts of text data. Through this training process, they develop sophisticated language, understanding, and reasoning, capabilities that emerge from the interaction between their architecture and their training data. Interestingly, these language models often struggle with questions about causation and temporal sequence, including variants of the chicken or egg problem. When asked which came first, they might give different answers depending on how the question is phrased or what context is provided. This suggests that even sophisticated AI systems find these circular causality problems challenging. Robotics provides another computational perspective on the chicken or egg paradox. To build robots that can interact effectively with the physical world, engineers need to solve bootstrap problems about perception and action. Robots need to perceive their environment to act effectively, but they need to act to gather the sensory data necessary for perception. This sensory motor bootstrap problem is fundamental to robotics and cognitive science. How do systems develop the ability to coordinate perception and action when each depends on the other? Solutions typically involve starting with simple, built-in reflexes and gradually building up more sophisticated sensory motor capabilities through interaction with the environment. Some researchers have proposed that biological development faces similar bootstrap problems. How do developing organisms coordinate the growth of their sensory systems with the development of their nervous systems when each depends on the other? The computational perspective suggests that evolution has found elegant solutions to these bootstrap problems through incremental development and self-organization. The field of complexity science, which studies emergent phenomena in complex systems, offers additional computational insights into our paradox. Complex systems often exhibit circular causality, where higher-level patterns influence lower-level components, which in turn influence higher-level patterns. In ecosystems, for example, predator-prey relationships create complex feedback loops where each species influences the evolution and behavior of the others. In economic systems, individual decisions aggregate to create market conditions that influence future individual decisions. In social systems, individual beliefs and behaviors create cultural patterns that influence individual beliefs and behaviors. These complex systems often exhibit what scientists call emergence, the appearance of higher-level patterns and behaviors that aren't present in the individual components. From this perspective, the chicken-egg system might be understood as an emergent property of evolutionary dynamics, where the circular relationship between reproduction and development creates stable, self-maintaining patterns. Computational models of complex systems have shown how circular causality can lead to self-organization and the emergence of stable patterns. These models suggest that instead of asking which came first, we might ask how the circular relationship between chickens and eggs creates a stable, self-maintaining reproductive system. The blockchain technology that underlies cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin provides another interesting computational parallel to our paradox. Blockchain systems face a bootstrap problem. The security of the blockchain depends on having many participants. Participants are only incentivized to join if the system is already secure. Bitcoin solved this problem through clever incentive design and gradual bootstrapping. The system started with a small number of participants and gradually attracted more as its value and security increased. This shows how computational systems can solve circular dependency problems through careful design and gradual growth. Looking toward the future, quantum computing might provide new perspectives on the chicken or egg paradox. Quantum computers can potentially perform certain types of calculations exponentially faster than classical computers, particularly calculations involving quantum superposition and entanglement. If biological systems do involve quantum effects, as some researchers have suggested, then quantum computers might be better suited to modeling and understanding these systems. They might reveal new aspects of biological causation and temporal relationships that classical computers can't capture. The field of artificial life continues to evolve, with researchers creating increasingly sophisticated models of biological processes. Some recent projects have created digital ecosystems where organisms evolve not just their behavior and structure, but also their reproductive mechanisms and even their genetic codes. These experiments might eventually provide definitive computational answers to questions about the evolution of reproduction. By observing the evolution of digital life forms in controlled computational environments, researchers might be able to see exactly how complex reproductive cycles like the chicken-egg system can emerge from simpler precursors. Artificial intelligence systems are also becoming increasingly sophisticated at analyzing biological data. Machine learning algorithms can now analyze genetic sequences, protein structures, and evolutionary relationships with unprecedented accuracy. As these tools continue to improve, they might provide new insights into the evolutionary history of reproductive systems. The computational perspective on the chicken or egg paradox reveals several important insights. First, circular dependencies are common in complex systems and can be resolved through bootstrap processes and iterative development. Second, the question of which came first might be less important than understanding how circular relationships create stable, self-maintaining systems. Third, computational tools are providing new ways to analyze causal relationships and model complex evolutionary processes. Perhaps most importantly, the computational perspective shows us that the chicken or egg paradox isn't just a biological or philosophical curiosity. It's an example of a fundamental type of problem that appears throughout science, engineering, and artificial intelligence. Understanding how to solve these circular dependency problems is crucial for building complex systems. Whether they're software programs, AI systems, or biological organisms, as artificial intelligence and computational science continue to advance. They'll likely provide even more sophisticated tools for understanding the chicken or egg paradox and similar questions about causation, emergence, and self-organization in complex systems. The ancient philosophical question continues to inspire new computational insights and technological developments. Our journey through the chicken or egg paradox wouldn't be complete without exploring how this ancient question has permeated popular culture, entertainment, and everyday life. From comedy routines to children's books, from advertising campaigns to internet memes, the chicken or egg question has become one of the most recognizable philosophical puzzles in human culture. The paradox has achieved something that most philosophical problems never do. It has escaped the confines of academic discourse and become part of our shared cultural vocabulary. Almost everyone knows the question, even if they've never studied philosophy or biology. This widespread recognition makes the chicken or egg paradox a unique window into how complex ideas spread through culture and how philosophical questions can take on lives of their own. Let's start with comedy, where the chicken or egg question has been a fertile source of material for generations of comedians. The question's familiar structure makes it perfect for subversion and unexpected twists. Comedians have played with the assumption that this is a difficult question, providing absurdly simple answers, or they've extended the logic to ridiculous extremes. The Marx Brothers, famous for their wordplay and logical absurdities, included variations of the chicken or egg question in their routines. Groucho Marx was known for taking logical puzzles and twisting them into comedic pretzels, often revealing the assumptions hidden in seemingly simple questions. More recently, comedians like George Carlin, known for his philosophical observations about everyday life, have used the chicken or egg question as a launching point for broader commentary about human nature and our obsession with finding simple answers to complex questions. Carlin might point out the absurdity of spending so much intellectual energy on a question about poultry, while ignoring more pressing human problems. Stand-up comedians often use the chicken or egg question as an example of overthinking or as a way to poke fun at intellectual pretension. The joke often lies in the contrast between the question's philosophical gravitas and its mundane subject matter. Here's a question that has puzzled the greatest minds in history, and it's about farm animals. The question has also found its way into children's literature and entertainment, where it serves a different function. For children, the chicken or egg question can be an introduction to logical thinking and the idea that some questions might not have simple answers. Dr. Seuss, the beloved children's author, never directly addressed the chicken or egg question, but his books often explore similar themes about causation, identity, and circular logic. Books like Green Eggs and Ham play with circular reasoning, while Horton Hatches the Egg explicitly deals with questions about the relationship between chickens and eggs, identity, and what makes something what it is. Other children's books have tackled the question more directly, usually with a gentle, educational approach that introduces young readers to the concept of scientific thinking and the idea that we can use evidence and reasoning to answer difficult questions. Television and film have also embraced the chicken or egg paradox, often using it as a shorthand for philosophical confusion or as a way to establish a character's intellectual pretensions or confusion. In sitcoms, a character might pose the question during a moment of stoned contemplation or philosophical meandering. Science fiction, with its love of temporal paradoxes and causal loops, has found many creative uses for chicken or egg logic. Time travel stories often create situations where effect precedes cause, leading to the same kind of circular causality that makes the chicken or egg question puzzling. The Back to the Future trilogy, for example, creates multiple scenarios where characters' actions in the past influence events that led to their ability to travel to the past in the first place. These temporal paradoxes are essentially chicken or egg problems played out on a grand scale. More sophisticated science fiction has used the chicken or egg structure to explore deeper questions about identity, consciousness, and the nature of reality. Philip K. Dick, the influential science fiction author, was fascinated by questions about what makes something real and often created scenarios where the boundary between original and copy, cause and effect, becomes blurred. The chicken or egg question has also been extensively used in advertising and marketing, where it serves as a way to position products or companies as solving fundamental problems or as being essential elements in important systems. Technology companies, in particular, have used chicken or egg metaphors to describe the network effects that make their products valuable. Social media platforms need users to be valuable, but users only join if there are already other users. Video game consoles need games to be appealing, but game developers only create games if there are enough console owners. The marketing challenge is often framed explicitly as a chicken or egg problem. How do you build a network or ecosystem when each component depends on the others? Companies that successfully solve these bootstrap problems often become dominant in their markets. The internet age has given the chicken or egg question new life through memes, viral videos, and online discussions. The question's familiarity makes it perfect meme material, and its philosophical depth provides endless opportunities for creative interpretation and commentary. Online forums and social media platforms regularly see discussions about the chicken or egg question, often spawning lengthy threads where users share scientific explanations, philosophical interpretations, and humorous variations. These discussions reveal how the question continues to engage people across different backgrounds and levels of education. Wikipedia, the collaborative online encyclopedia, has a substantial article about the chicken or egg question that represents a kind of collective, cultural attempt to compile all known approaches to the problem. The article has been edited thousands of times by contributors from around the world, each adding their own perspective or correcting others' interpretations. The question has also inspired countless variations and parodies. People have asked which came first, the guitar or the guitarist, the chicken or the road it crossed, the chicken or the nugget. These variations often reveal something about contemporary culture and what kinds of circular dependencies we encounter in modern life. Video games have embraced the chicken or egg paradox in various ways. Some puzzle games explicitly use circular logic as a gameplay mechanism, challenging players to solve problems where the solution seems to require information or tools that depend on already having solved the problem. Role-playing games and strategy games often feature bootstrap economies where players need to build systems with circular dependencies. You need farms to feed workers, but you need workers to build farms. You need weapons to defeat enemies, but you need to defeat enemies to get materials for weapons. These gaming applications of chicken or egg logic have introduced new generations to the basic concepts of circular causality and bootstrap problems, often without explicitly connecting them to the philosophical tradition. The question has even influenced music and art. Songs have been written about the chicken or egg question, ranging from children's educational songs to more sophisticated artistic explorations of the themes of causation and circularity. Visual artists have created works inspired by the circular logic of the chicken or egg question, often using images of infinite loops, recursive patterns, or impossible geometric forms to represent the paradox visually. The famous lithographs of M.C. Escher, with their impossible staircases and self-referential imagery, capture something of the same logical vertigo that the chicken or egg question can induce. The question has also become a standard reference point in educational contexts. Teachers across many disciplines use the chicken or egg question as an example when introducing students to concepts like circular reasoning, logical fallacies, evolutionary thinking, or causal analysis. In biology classes, the question provides a natural entry point for discussions about evolution, reproductive strategies, and the gradual nature of evolutionary change. In philosophy classes, it serves as an accessible introduction to more complex problems about causation, infinite regress, and the logic of explanation. Business schools often use chicken or egg problems as case studies in entrepreneurship and strategy. How do you launch a business when success depends on having multiple interdependent components that each depend on the others? The lessons learned from analyzing the chicken or egg question can be applied to real-world business challenges. The psychological appeal of the chicken or egg question is worth examining. Why has this particular paradox achieved such widespread cultural recognition? Part of the answer lies in its perfect balance of accessibility and depth. The question is simple enough that anyone can understand it, but complex enough that it rewards deeper thinking. The question also taps into fundamental human cognitive patterns. We're naturally inclined to think in terms of cause and effect, beginning and end, before and after. The chicken or egg question challenges these basic patterns without being so abstract that we can't relate to it. There's also something appealingly democratic about the question. Unlike many philosophical problems that require specialized knowledge or training to understand, the chicken or egg question can be grasped by anyone familiar with chickens and eggs. This accessibility has helped it spread across cultures and educational levels. The question's staying power in popular culture also reflects its genuine philosophical significance. It's not just a silly riddle, but a real problem that touches on fundamental issues in logic, science, and metaphysics. The fact that experts continue to debate it gives cultural weight to its popular recognition. Contemporary internet culture has created new contexts for the chicken or egg question. Online debates about the question often become proxies for broader discussions about science versus religion, determinism versus free will, or the nature of knowledge and truth. The question has also been used in political and social commentary, often as a way to point out circular problems in social systems. Which comes first, poverty or lack of education? Crime or social breakdown? Individual responsibility or social support? These contemporary applications show how the logical structure of the chicken or egg problem continues to be relevant for understanding modern challenges. Looking toward the future, the chicken or egg question will likely continue to evolve with our culture. As our scientific understanding deepens and our philosophical perspectives shift, new interpretations and applications of the question will emerge. Virtual and augmented reality technologies might create new ways to experience and explore the paradox. Artificial intelligence might provide new computational approaches to the question. Advances in biology might reveal new aspects of reproductive evolution that illuminate the historical relationship between chickens and eggs. The question's presence in popular culture also serves an important educational function. For many people, encountering the chicken or egg question in entertainment or casual conversation might be their first exposure to philosophical thinking or scientific reasoning about evolution and causation. This cultural transmission of philosophical ideas is a remarkable phenomenon. A question that originated in ancient Greek philosophy has traveled through thousands of years of human culture, accumulating new meanings and interpretations while retaining its essential puzzle. It has survived the transition from oral to written culture, from local to global communication, and from elite to popular discourse. The chicken or egg question in popular culture represents something beautiful about human intellectual curiosity. Despite all our technological advances and social changes, we remain fascinated by fundamental questions about existence, causation, and the nature of reality. The fact that this ancient puzzle continues to engage us shows that some aspects of human nature and human questioning remain constant across time and culture. As we conclude our exploration of the chicken or egg paradox in popular culture, it's worth reflecting on what this widespread cultural phenomenon tells us about ourselves. We are creatures who love puzzles, who enjoy the mental challenge of circular logic, and who find meaning in questions that might not have simple answers. The enduring popularity of the chicken or egg question is, in its own way, a celebration of human curiosity and our endless capacity for wonder. As we near the end of our comprehensive journey through the chicken or egg paradox, it's time to examine how this ancient question continues to influence and inform cutting-edge scientific research. Far from being merely a historical curiosity or philosophical puzzle, the logical structure of the chicken or egg problem appears throughout modern science, from developmental biology to systems theory, from ecology to artificial intelligence research. The implications of how we approach and resolve chicken or egg problems extend far beyond questions about poultry. These circular causality challenges appear wherever complex systems with interdependent components need to be understood, built, or modified. Let's explore how modern scientists and researchers are applying insights from the chicken or egg paradox to solve real-world problems. In developmental biology, researchers face chicken or egg problems at multiple levels. How do cells know what type of cells to become during embryonic development? The answer involves complex networks of gene expression, where genes regulate other genes, which in turn regulate the first genes. This creates circular regulatory networks, where the current state of gene expression determines future gene expression. The famous French flag model in developmental biology illustrates this beautifully. This model explains how embryonic cells can determine their position and fate based on gradients of signaling molecules. But where do these gradients come from? They're created by the very cells whose development they're supposed to guide. This creates a bootstrap problem. Cells need positional information to develop properly, but they also need to create that positional information. Recent research has shown that developing embryos solve this chicken or egg problem through a process called self-organization. Initially random or slightly biased patterns of gene expression create small differences between cells. These differences are amplified through feedback loops until clear patterns emerge. The system literally pulls itself up by its bootstraps, creating organization from initially disorganized components. This research has practical applications in regenerative medicine and tissue engineering. Scientists trying to grow replacement organs in the laboratory face similar chicken or egg problems. How do you create the complex, organized structure of an organ when different cell types depend on signals from other cell types to develop properly? The solution often involves understanding and harnessing the same self-organization principles that embryos use. By creating the right initial conditions and allowing feedback loops to operate, researchers can guide the development of complex tissues without having to explicitly program every aspect of their structure. Cancer research also grapples with chicken or egg problems. Does genetic damage cause the cellular environment that promotes more genetic damage? Or does a damaged cellular environment cause the genetic mutations that drive cancer? The answer appears to be both. Cancer involves complex types feedback loops where genetic and environmental factors reinforce each other in a vicious cycle. Understanding these feedback loops is crucial for developing effective cancer treatments, rather than looking for single causes or simple linear pathways. Cancer researchers are increasingly focused on understanding the complex networks of interactions that sustain cancer growth. This systems-level approach recognizes that cancer is fundamentally a problem of dysregulated circular causality. Ecology provides another rich source of chicken or egg problems. Consider the relationship between predators and prey in an ecosystem. Predator populations depend on adequate prey populations for food, but prey populations are controlled by predation pressure. Changes in either population affect the other, creating complex dynamics where cause and effect become intertwined. The famous case of wolves and elk in Yellowstone National Park illustrates this complexity. When wolves were eliminated from Yellowstone in the early 20th century, elk populations grew dramatically. But the large elk herds prevented tree saplings from growing, which affected bird populations, which affected insect populations, which affected soil quality, which affected plant growth. When wolves were reintroduced in 1995, the entire ecosystem underwent a transformation that ecologists call a trophic cascade. This example shows how apparently simple predator-prey relationships are actually embedded in complex webs of circular causality. Understanding these relationships is crucial for conservation efforts and ecosystem management. Ecologists can't simply focus on individual species. They need to understand the circular feedback loops that maintain ecosystem stability. Climate science faces similar challenges. The Earth's climate system involves numerous feedback loops where effects become causes. For example, as global temperatures rise, Arctic ice melts, reducing the amount of sunlight reflected back to space, which causes more warming, which melts more ice. Understanding these feedback loops is essential for predicting future climate change and developing effective mitigation strategies. Atmospheric scientists use sophisticated computer models to simulate these complex interactions, but the models themselves face chicken or egg problems. To build accurate climate models, you need detailed data about how different components of the climate system interact. But to collect this data efficiently, you need models that tell you where and what to measure. This challenge has led to iterative approaches where models and observations inform each other. Initial models guide data collection efforts, which provide information for improved models, which guide better data collection, and so on. The process gradually converges on more accurate understanding through this bootstrap approach. In neuroscience, the relationship between brain structure and function presents classic chicken or egg problems. Does brain activity create neural connections? Or do neural connections determine brain activity? The answer is both. Neural activity strengthens connections through a process called synaptic plasticity. But the pattern of connections also determines what kinds of activity are possible. This circular relationship is fundamental to learning and memory. When we learn something new, patterns of neural activity create and strengthen the connections that will later support that memory. The brain literally rewires itself based on its own activity, creating a self-modifying system where structure and function continuously influence each other. Understanding this circular causality is crucial for developing treatments for neurological and psychiatric disorders. Rather than simply looking for single causes or targeting individual brain regions, neuroscientists are increasingly focused on understanding the complex networks and feedback loops that underlie brain function. Recent advances in neurotechnology, such as brain-computer interfaces and neural stimulation devices, rely heavily on understanding these circular relationships to build devices that can effectively interface with the brain. Engineers need to understand how neural activity and stimulation affect each other in complex feedback loops. The field of systems biology explicitly focuses on understanding circular causality in biological systems. Traditional molecular biology often took a reductionist approach, studying individual genes and proteins in isolation. Systems biology recognizes that biological function emerges from complex networks of interactions, where components continuously influence each other. Gene regulatory networks provide perfect examples of biological chicken or egg problems. Genes encode proteins that regulate the expression of other genes, including the genes that encode the regulatory proteins themselves. This creates complex feedback loops where the current state of the network determines its future state. Understanding these networks is crucial for developing new medical treatments and biotechnology applications. For example, researchers working on synthetic biology face the challenge of designing artificial gene networks that can perform desired functions. This requires understanding how to create stable patterns of gene expression using the same circular regulatory principles that natural systems use. The pharmaceutical industry regularly encounters chicken or egg problems in drug development. Many diseases involve complex networks of interacting factors, where it's difficult to identify single targets for therapeutic intervention. The most effective treatments often need to address multiple components of these networks simultaneously. For example, metabolic diseases like diabetes involve complex interactions between diet, exercise, genetics, and various physiological systems. Effective treatments often require addressing multiple factors simultaneously, recognizing that these factors influence each other in complex circular relationships. The field of synthetic biology is explicitly built around understanding and engineering circular causality in biological systems. Synthetic biologists design artificial biological circuits that can perform computational functions, produce valuable chemicals, or serve as biosensors. These applications require deep understanding of how to create stable, predictable behavior in systems with complex feedback loops. One of the major challenges in synthetic biology is what researchers call the chassis problem, another chicken or egg issue. To engineer biological systems effectively, you need standardized, well-characterized biological components and host organisms. But to develop these standardized components, you need sophisticated engineering tools and techniques. Building synthetic biology capabilities requires simultaneous development of tools, standards, and applications. The emerging field of artificial life provides a unique perspective on chicken or egg problems by creating digital and robotic systems that exhibit lifelike properties, including reproduction, evolution, and self-organization. These systems allow researchers to study the fundamental principles of circular causality in controlled environments. For example, researchers have created computer simulations where digital organisms evolve increasingly sophisticated reproductive mechanisms. These experiments provide insights into how complex reproductive cycles, like the chicken-egg system, might have evolved from simpler self-replicating systems. Robotics research faces practical chicken or egg problems in developing autonomous systems. Robots need sensors to perceive their environment and actuators to interact with it. But effective sensing often requires appropriate action, and effective action requires adequate sensing. Roboticists have developed various bootstrap approaches to this sensory-motor coordination problem. Some of the most advanced robotics research focuses on creating robots that can learn and adapt through interaction with their environment. These systems need to solve chicken or egg problems about learning. They need experience to learn effectively. But they need some learning capability to gain relevant experience. The implications of chicken or egg thinking extend to technology policy and innovation management. Technology ecosystems often exhibit chicken or egg dynamics, where different components need each other to be successful. Electric vehicles need charging infrastructure, but charging infrastructure is only economical if there are enough electric vehicles. Renewable energy needs storage technology. But storage technology needs sufficient renewable energy deployment to be cost-effective. Policymakers and business strategists increasingly recognize that addressing these circular dependencies requires coordinated approaches rather than purely market-driven solutions. Government incentives, public-private partnerships, and strategic coordination can help bootstrap new technology ecosystems past their initial chicken or egg barriers. The study of innovation itself reveals chicken or egg dynamics. Breakthrough innovations often require the simultaneous development of multiple supporting technologies and capabilities. The development of the Internet, for example, required advances in computer hardware, software, networking protocols, and user interfaces, all of which needed to develop together to create a functioning system. Understanding these dynamics is crucial for science, policy, and research funding decisions. Rather than funding individual technologies in isolation, effective innovation policy often requires supporting entire ecosystems of related technologies and capabilities. Looking toward the future, the insights from chicken or egg thinking are likely to become even more important as scientific challenges become increasingly complex and interdisciplinary. Climate change, pandemic preparedness, sustainable development, and artificial intelligence safety all involve complex systems, with circular feedback loops where traditional linear thinking about cause and effect is insufficient. The chicken or egg paradox, which began as an ancient philosophical puzzle, has evolved into a fundamental framework for understanding complex systems across multiple scientific disciplines. Its enduring relevance demonstrates how deep philosophical questions can provide practical insights for solving real-world problems. Perhaps most importantly, the chicken or egg perspective teaches us humility about causation and control in complex systems. Rather than seeking simple causes and linear solutions, this framework encourages us to think in terms of networks, feedback loops, and emergent properties. This shift in thinking is essential for addressing the complex. Challenges facing science and society in the 21st century. As we reach the end of our epic journey through the chicken or egg paradox, it's time to step back and reflect on what we've discovered. We've traveled from ancient Greek philosophy to quantum mechanics, from evolutionary biology to artificial intelligence, from religious mythology to popular culture. Along the way, we've seen how this deceptively simple question opens up into some of the deepest and most fascinating problems in human thought. So, what's the answer? Which came first, the chicken or the egg? As you might have suspected by now, there isn't a single simple answer that works for all contexts and all ways of understanding the question. Instead, we've discovered that the chicken or egg paradox is like a prism that breaks the white light of human curiosity into a spectacular rainbow of different approaches, insights, and perspectives. From an evolutionary biology perspective, the answer is clear. Eggs came first by hundreds of millions of years. The first shelled eggs appeared around 340 million years ago, while chickens have only existed for about 8 million years, and domestic chickens for only about 8,000 years. If we're asking about the broad evolutionary history of reproduction, eggs are ancient and chickens are newcomers. But if we narrow the question to ask specifically about chicken eggs, the answer becomes more complex and depends on how we define our terms. If a chicken egg is an egg laid by a chicken, then the chicken came first. If a chicken egg is an egg containing a chicken, then the egg came first. The genetic perspective suggests that the first true chicken would have been a chicken from the moment of conception, which means it was a chicken while still developing inside its egg. From a protein chemistry perspective, the 2010 research on ovoclidin 17 seemed to suggest that chickens came first, since this protein necessary for modern chicken eggshells is only produced by chickens. However, this research tells us more about modern chicken biology than about evolutionary history, since earlier birds produced eggs using different proteins. The logical and philosophical perspectives reveal that the chicken or egg question is fundamentally about circular causality and infinite regress. Classical logic struggles with such circular relationships, but modern philosophy has developed sophisticated tools for understanding interdependence, emergence, and systems thinking that provide new ways to approach the question. Religious and mythological perspectives offer their own answers, typically emphasizing divine creation, eternal cycles, or the fundamental interconnectedness of all life. These approaches remind us that questions about origins and causation aren't purely scientific or logical, but also touch on deep human needs for meaning and purpose. Quantum mechanics, with its revelations about the nature of causation, time, and reality itself, suggests that our ordinary assumptions about linear causation and temporal sequence might be more limited than we usually assume. While quantum effects probably don't directly influence the evolutionary relationship between chickens and eggs, they do challenge us to think more carefully about the nature of causation itself. Artificial intelligence and computational approaches have shown us that chicken or egg problems are ubiquitous in complex systems, and that sophisticated bootstrap strategies have been developed to solve them. These computational insights suggest that circular dependencies aren't necessarily problems to be avoided, but features of complex systems that can be understood and managed. The persistence of the chicken or egg question in popular culture reveals something important about human nature. We're creatures who love puzzles, who enjoy intellectual challenges, and who find meaning in questions that don't have simple answers. The fact that this ancient puzzle continues to engage us across cultures and generations speaks to our enduring capacity for wonder and curiosity. Perhaps most importantly, our journey through the chicken or egg paradox has revealed how a single question can illuminate multiple ways of knowing and understanding. Scientific investigation, logical analysis, philosophical reflection, religious insight, and cultural expression all contribute different perspectives that enrich our overall understanding. This multiplicity of approaches teaches us something crucial about the nature of knowledge itself. Complex questions rarely have simple answers, And the most interesting questions often require multiple types of investigation to understand fully. The chicken or egg paradox is valuable not because it has a single correct answer, but because it draws our attention to fundamental issues about causation, time, evolution, and the nature of existence itself. The question also illustrates the importance of being precise about what we're asking. Different versions of the chicken or egg question, with different definitions and different contexts, legitimately have different answers. This precision about questions and definitions is crucial not just for philosophical puzzles, but for scientific research, policymaking, and clear thinking in general. Our exploration has also revealed how scientific understanding evolves over time. The chicken or egg question that puzzled ancient philosophers has been transformed by our understanding of evolution, genetics, molecular biology, and complex systems. Future scientific discoveries will likely provide new perspectives on this ancient question, just as past discoveries have done. The interdisciplinary nature of our investigation shows how the most interesting questions often cross traditional boundaries between fields. Understanding the chicken or egg paradox fully requires insights from biology, philosophy, physics, computer science, psychology, anthropology, and many other disciplines. This interdisciplinary approach is increasingly important for addressing complex contemporary challenges. Looking toward the future, the chicken or egg paradox will likely continue to evolve and find new applications. As our scientific understanding deepens, as our philosophical perspectives develop, and as our technological capabilities expand, new versions of this ancient question will emerge. In biology, advances in understanding, development, evolution, and complex systems will likely provide even more sophisticated answers to questions about the origins and relationships between different reproductive strategies. New technologies for studying ancient DNA, protein evolution, and developmental processes will give us increasingly detailed pictures of how reproductive systems evolved. In artificial intelligence, as we develop more sophisticated systems that can learn, reason, and perhaps even evolve, we'll encounter new versions of chicken or egg problems about intelligence, consciousness, and agency. How do we bootstrap artificial intelligence systems to human-level capability? How do we create AI systems that can learn effectively while remaining safe and aligned with human values? In physics, continued exploration of quantum mechanics, cosmology, and the nature of time might reveal new perspectives on causation and temporal relationships that could illuminate the logical structure of the chicken or egg paradox in unexpected ways. In philosophy, ongoing developments in our understanding of emergence, complexity, and the relationship between different levels of description will likely provide new frameworks for understanding circular causality and interdependence. The chicken or egg question also has important practical implications for how we approach complex challenges in the real world. Many of the most pressing problems facing humanity today, from climate change to pandemic preparedness to sustainable development, involve complex systems with circular feedback loops where simple linear thinking is insufficient. Climate change, for example, involves numerous chicken or egg relationships. Does economic development cause environmental degradation? Or does environmental degradation hinder economic development? Does population growth cause resource scarcity? Or does resource scarcity cause conflicts that affect population dynamics? Understanding these circular relationships is crucial for developing effective policies and solutions. The COVID-19 pandemic revealed similar circular dependencies. Does public health infrastructure enable economic prosperity? Or does economic prosperity enable investment in public health? Does social trust enable effective public health measures? Or do effective public health measures build social trust? The pandemic showed how these circular relationships can create either virtuous cycles of effective response or vicious cycles of institutional failure. The lessons from our exploration of the chicken or egg paradox suggest that addressing these complex challenges requires systems thinking, interdisciplinary collaboration, and recognition of circular causality. rather than looking for simple causes and linear solutions. We need approaches that can work with circular dependencies and bootstrap complex systems toward better outcomes. Educational systems face similar chicken or egg challenges. Does education create opportunity, or does opportunity enable access to education? Does knowledge create wisdom, or does wisdom enable the effective acquisition of knowledge? Understanding these relationships is crucial for designing educational policies and practices that can break cycles of disadvantage and create virtuous cycles of learning and development. Innovation and technology development also exhibit chicken or egg dynamics. New technologies often require supporting ecosystems of related technologies, skilled workers, regulatory frameworks, and market demand. Creating these ecosystems requires coordinated effort and recognition that different components need to develop together rather than in strict sequence. The chicken or egg perspective also has implications for how we think about personal development and social change. Individual behavior and social systems influence each other in complex circular relationships. Does changing individual attitudes lead to social change, or does social change enable individual transformation? The answer is both, and effective approaches to personal and social development need to work with these circular relationships rather than against them. Perhaps one of the most important lessons from our journey is the value of intellectual humility. The chicken or egg paradox teaches us that some questions don't have simple answers, and that's okay. In fact, it's often the questions without simple answers that are the most interesting and valuable, because they force us to think more deeply and consider multiple perspectives. This intellectual humility is crucial in our current era of rapid change and complex challenges. We live in a world where simple answers and quick fixes are often appealing, but where the most important problems require nuanced understanding and sophisticated approaches. The chicken or egg paradox, with its resistance to simple resolution and its requirement for multiple types of investigation, provides excellent training for this kind of complex thinking. The paradox also teaches us about the value of curiosity and wonder. Throughout our exploration, we've seen how this simple question has inspired countless investigations, discoveries, and insights across multiple fields and cultures. The people who have grappled with this question, from ancient philosophers to modern scientists, have been united by their curiosity and their willingness to take seemingly simple questions seriously. This capacity for wonder and curiosity is one of humanity's greatest strengths. It's what drives scientific discovery, philosophical insight, artistic creation, and cultural development. The chicken or egg paradox, in its persistence and its ability to engage people across different backgrounds and time periods, is a testament to the power of human curiosity. As we conclude our comprehensive exploration, it's worth reflecting on what this journey reveals about the nature of knowledge and understanding. We've seen how different approaches, different methodologies, and different perspectives can all contribute valuable insights to our understanding of a single question. Scientific investigation has provided us with detailed evolutionary histories and molecular mechanisms. Philosophical analysis has revealed the logical structure of the problem and its connections to fundamental questions about causation and existence. Religious and cultural perspectives have shown us how questions about origins connect to deeper questions about meaning and purpose. Computational approaches have demonstrated practical strategies for dealing with circular dependencies in complex systems. None of these approaches alone provides a complete answer to the chicken or egg question, but together they create a rich, multifaceted understanding that is more valuable than any single perspective could provide. This integration of multiple ways of knowing is increasingly important for addressing complex contemporary challenges. The chicken or egg paradox also illustrates the dynamic nature of knowledge. Our understanding of this question has evolved dramatically over the centuries as new scientific discoveries, philosophical insights, and technological capabilities have emerged. What seemed like a simple, logical puzzle to ancient philosophers has been transformed by our understanding of evolution, genetics, molecular biology, quantum mechanics, computer science, and complex systems. This evolution of understanding reminds us that knowledge is not static, but constantly developing. Today's best answers to the chicken or egg question will likely seem incomplete or naive to future generations, who will have access to new discoveries and new ways of thinking that we can't yet imagine. Finally, our journey through the chicken or egg paradox reminds us of the importance of asking good questions. The chicken or egg question has been so productive and enduring, not because it has easy answers, but because it's a well-formed question that touches on fundamental issues and admits multiple productive approaches. In our personal lives, our professional work, and our collective efforts to understand and improve the world, the quality of our questions often determines the quality of our answers. The chicken or egg paradox, with its deceptive simplicity and surprising depth, provides a model for the kinds of questions that are worth asking and pursuing. As we go forward from this exploration, we can carry with us several important insights. We can approach complex problems with intellectual humility, recognizing that the most interesting questions rarely have simple answers. We can embrace interdisciplinary thinking, drawing insights from multiple fields and perspectives. We can appreciate the value of circular causality and systems thinking for understanding complex relationships. We can maintain our capacity for wonder and curiosity, taking seemingly simple questions seriously and following them wherever they lead. Most importantly, we can remember that the chicken or egg question, in all its forms and applications, reminds us that reality is far more complex, interesting, and wonderful than our everyday experience might suggest. From the molecular mechanisms of protein synthesis to the vast scales of evolutionary time, from the logical puzzles of circular causality to the cultural transmission of ideas across generations, the simple question of which came first opens up into a universe of fascinating possibilities. The next time someone asks you which came first, the chicken or the egg, you might smile and realize that they've just asked you one of the most profound questions in human thought. And depending on your mood, your audience, and your goals, you might give them an evolutionary answer, a logical analysis, a philosophical reflection, or simply another question in return. Because sometimes the best answer to a great question is an even better question. The chicken or egg paradox will undoubtedly continue to evolve, finding new applications and generating new insights as human knowledge and capability expand. Its journey is far from over, and its capacity to surprise and enlighten us remains as strong as ever. In a world full of complex challenges and rapid change, we need all the intellectual tools we can get. And the humble chicken or egg question has proven to be one of our most versatile and enduring tools for understanding the nature of causation, its complexity, and existence itself.